Pleasant good night to everyone, and welcome to another series of the Master Plan for a Healthy Community. Remember, this is our fifth week, and there's a little song that goes, "Things are getting better, better for me. For the Lord is on my side. Things are getting better." What can we say? It's a definitely testimony that things are getting better during this series. Tonight, is there any first timer here on our platform tonight? If there's anybody coming here for the first time, if you're viewing from Jamaica, you're viewing from Africa, wherever, just let us know in the chat if you're visiting us for the first time. If not, just want to say a special welcome to our regular viewers. Thank you again for coming out, and have no doubt that tonight is just going to be a spirit-filled one. Tonight we're going to speak about anxiety. Last night we dealt with depression and how it's important for us to be transparent whenever we're going through that process. Exercising helps with depression. Dieting helps with depression, and many more things help with depression. But tonight we're gonna look at anxiety and how does that links. How does that affect us? What is anxiety, and many other things we're gonna dive into. Just before Andrea speak, as usual, housekeeping. Please keep your mic muted, and you will have that opportunity to ask your questions at the end of the presentation. So please don't worry, your questions will be asked. You can ask the questions at the end of the presentation. But just before we hand over to our speaker, Andrea Edwards, let's bow our heads and close our eyes as we seek God's guidance and understanding. Dear mightyful and loving God, we just want to praise you and thank you for all the things you have done in our lives, Lord. And for this week, Lord, you have shown us a new way, Lord, of thinking. You have opened our understanding about this monster that is in many of our life, this mounting depression. Lord, it's been affecting us vastly, Lord, but you have shown us a way through these presentations that, Lord, with you, everything is possible. So, Lord, thank you for all that you're going to do, and be with the presenter tonight, and as she unfolds many more information relating to this issue of anxiety and depression, Lord, we just want to prepare, sit back and relax. And thank you for all that you're going to do. In the most holy name I pray. Amen. So tonight, again, we just want to welcome Andrea as she speaks to us on the topic of depression. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, thank you again for coming today, and thank you for coming yesterday as well. Just want to briefly apologise because I went a bit over yesterday. Right, so I'm going to share my screen and then we can dive right in. Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay, great, thank you. Okay, so far we're on day 3. Sunday we looked at mental health, an overview of mental health. We spoke about how most times people, when they think about mental health, they think about ill health rather than actually seeing it as a spectrum. And we all have mental health, and our minds can be reshaped based on our thinking patterns, based on our lifestyle, how we live our lives. And yesterday, we looked at depression. So we looked at clinical depression, which is different to feeling low. We all feel low at some point in our lives, or we will do at some point in our lives, but that is very different to what clinical depression is, and that being a medical condition. Today, we're going to look at anxiety. So before I start, I'm going to ask everyone, what can you see from this picture? And feel free to just unmute for a second. But when you look at this image, what do you see? Or can you see anything? Maybe it should be. Can you see anything when you look at this picture? Can anyone see anything?
Yeah, I see two things, possibly. An older lady and a lady her head turned to the side.
Yeah. I don't know if everyone can see that, but there is an elderly lady, and I don't know if you can see my mice as well, but this is her nose, and here's her mouth, and her chin, and a younger lady with her face turned to the side. So this is her face, and this bit is her nose, and this bit is the hair. So I don't know if everyone can see that. Some people just see the lady with her head turned, other people see the older lady, and some people actually don't see either. And like Andre just said as well, some people see both. There's another image of this one. What do you see with this one, if anyone feels comfortable to unmute?
I can see a baby and then two people on the lower right-hand corner.
Yeah. So there's a baby here, almost like in the tree. Well, it's not really a tree, but and there's also two people here as well. The reason why I started off with this is, again, going back to the mind. We spoke on Sunday about, and even previous presentations, spoke about how powerful the mind is and what we see. So our senses feed into our brains, and our brains interpret what it is that our senses is seeing, is communicating. So some people might see one thing and someone else might see something different. Okay, so bear that in mind as we touch on anxiety. I'll come back to this in a bit. Okay, so what is anxiety? When you think of anxiety, or if you've experienced anxiety, what is it for you?
Shortness of breath.
Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. Shortness of breath, yeah, that's right. So it's, at some point in life, we'll all feel anxious about something. If starting a new job, people might feel anxious. Moving to a new home, doing exams, driving. There's all kinds of reasons why people feel anxious, and that's pretty much, it's pretty normal. It's normal to feel some level of anxiety, and in some cases, experiencing anxiety is a good thing because it can motivate us to do better, or to push ourselves to do something that we probably wouldn't necessarily do if there was no anxieties there as well. But I guess anxiety is an emotion as well. So when we feel under threat, or when the brain perceives some form of threat, that is when we feel anxiety, or we feel anxious. It's the body's natural response to stress, and it's a feeling of fear. Worry about what's going to happen next, or what's to come. Okay. When anxiety, like I said before, it's normal for all of us to experience anxiety from time to time. But when it's constant and it's lasting all the time, over 6 months, it's interfering with your everyday life. It's not just a certain aspect of life you're anxious about. It's impacting on work, it's impacting on home, or in school or college. That is when it becomes an anxiety disorder. And when you think about the mental health continuum spectrum, that's when you're moving towards being mentally unwell. Okay. Anxiety can be experienced through our thoughts and feelings and also physical sensations. So there are different types of anxiety. Can anyone maybe identify some? You know, any of the different types of anxieties?
Do you mean as in
there's
what physically happens, or?
No, so so we've got post-traumatic stress disorder. That's that's a form of anxiety, which is very different to generalized anxiety. So post-traumatic stress disorder is when someone experienced something traumatic and they're constantly reliving that event. So they can't sleep, they can't switch off. They're reliving it as if it's still it's still happening in that present moment. So that's one form of anxiety. Generalized anxiety is when you're constantly worried about everything and anything. So it's not just about work, it's not just about something that happened in the past. It's not about, let's say, finance or relationships. It's literally everything that's happening in that person's life. Phobias as well is also another form of anxiety. I personally have a phobia of lizards. It's not as bad now as it used to be. But when I think, even just to think about lizards, just to see the word lizard or to see an image of a picture, it creates a lot of physical responses in me, and that is a phobia. But it's another type of anxiety. And there are also social anxiety. So social anxiety is more to do with social events and social situations. What I am going to do throughout this presentation is I am going to link aspects of it to my own personal experiences. And I'm not someone who has, I don't have social anxiety, but I have to admit during lockdown, I still had to work. I wasn't working all the time because I was also on maternity leave. I came on maternity leave October last year. But prior to that, when everyone was under lockdown, I still had to go into work. And for me, returning to work was okay because that just remained consistent and it was the same. But I noticed, which was really strange, when I went back to church for the first time, which I was really excited for, after doing church online on Zoom for a long time, which was great. That was great. I couldn't wait to physically be back at church and also to get my little girl and my little boy into that routine as well. But the first time I went back to church, I was actually surprised at how quickly I wanted to get away. And it sounds really strange, but because I've never felt socially anxious at church before. But following lockdown, it was just, I just couldn't be, I don't know, I couldn't be in church. I was there for like the children's Sabbath school, and after that, I found myself desperately wanting to get away, and I realised very quickly, oh, there's elements here of social anxiety that's creeping up, because the minute I got to my car, it was okay. I could sit in my car and listen to the sermon from my car, but to actually go into church and sit in church, I felt I was feeling really, really anxious. And then I noticed it was happening as well when, for example, if I was going to, to meet up with a lot of friends that I hadn't seen for ages, to meet them on a one-to-one or just a few at one time, it was fine. But when it was a lot of, like say, for example, a small gathering, it became really, really difficult. So that was something straight away I recognized, thought, okay, I need to really work on this, otherwise it's going to be a big issue for me going forward. But yeah, that's just a mini personal experience there. So I'm not sure why my heading's not there, but so sometimes people actually confuse stress and anxiety, or it get used together, which most times stress do bring on anxiety, or anxiety can bring on stress, but they're actually two different feelings. When you feel stressed, usually it's because of a known source, you know what it is that is stressing you. Example, if you've got an exam that that you might not feel prepared for, or that in itself could cause stress, and then that could also then cause anxiety. Anxiety, on the other hand, is a specific feeling or fear or dread, and there isn't always a clear trigger to what anxiety is. Whereas with stress, there's usually a known source as to what's causing the stress. And sometimes people might not actually understand in that moment of stress, they might not actually realize what is causing the stress. But when they think about it and reflect on it, or get support, whether that's talking therapy or talking with a friend, or a pastor, or just talking it through, they could probably identify what the source is. Whereas again, with anxiety, it's not always that clear cut. Oh, I did it back to front. Okay. So some of the physical symptoms of anxieties are, your breathing change, and you start breathing faster. Sometimes you start feeling sickly. You might feel a really tight pain in your chest. And for someone who's maybe never experienced that before, they might start feeling really even more anxious, thinking, oh, is there something wrong with their heart? Sometimes it's pins and needles in their toes or fingers. Some people actually pass out from feeling anxious. So it can make you feel faint and dizzy as well. It can bring on tension headaches, sweating, it can increase the blood pressure. You can have difficulty sleeping, and you can find that you're actually going to the toilet a lot more as well, and that dreaded feeling in your stomach. Panic attack as well is another symptom of anxiety, and it's when it's when you get so anxious, you're struggling to breathe, and your heart's it will start pounding so fast, and again you'll start feeling really faint, really your palms will feel really sweaty, probably feel really sickly, your limbs start to shake, and some people feel really disconnected as well from their body. So that's another extent of anxiety. in terms of your thoughts and feelings, it's different for different people, but anxiety usually is brought on by how you perceive something, you know, how the brain interprets what it sees. Going back to the images before, I'm sure none of you would have perceived those images as threatening, but for someone else, they could potentially see something that was threatening, and even though there was no threat there, the brain sees that as, okay, this is a threat, and it reacts in the same way as if I probably got to you, you know. And just imagine if someone was to do that, the shock and the anxiety you would feel. So someone who struggles with anxiety, that is the extent to which the brain is reacting based on what it perceives. So the two part of the brain that is actually key player in the production and processing of anxiety is the amygdala, the amygdala and hippocampus. So those part of the brain is said to be the area that communicates more with the incoming sensory signals. So the sensory signals are basically what you get from your five senses, you know, what you see, what you hear, those kind of things. And it communicates with the part of the brain that interprets those signals. It also alerts the rest of the brain as well that there's a threat present, and basically triggers that fear response. So that could be to maybe, you know, that's when you probably go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, because the brain is saying there's a threat here and it needs to respond to that. Let's look about that. So this is an example. So imagine you see this, okay, so it's a cartoon person, but you see a person running towards you. Now two people could actually be seeing the same thing happening. One person could interpret that as, one person's brain could interpret that as, oh gosh, someone is coming to attack me. Whereas the other person could see it as confusion. You know, their brain could interpret as, why is that person running so fast? Where they're running to? And they might even link that to maybe a situation from the past where they, you know, when they've seen someone running away, you know, they could come up with a story like, oh, he must be running away from someone, or he must be running late, or he's got an urgent appointment to go to. But someone who's anxious will just see danger, and the brain reacts to that. And that's where as well, you know, going back to, I don't know if everyone here was here when I spoke about my auntie and anxiety. So growing up, she was, we didn't realize it at the time until later on, but she was very, very anxious. And a lot of her anxiety stemmed from, you know, a lot of negative experiences from the past, and childhood situations, and, you know, a lot of traumas that she had in her past, and they weren't dealt with. So because they weren't dealt with, she had been in this state of panic, and her brain pretty much was in survival mode all the time. So she suffered with generalized anxiety, and a lot of other type of anxiety as well, but the main one was generalized anxiety, where she was just worried about everything, and everything was negative. You could go to her with the best news. I remember when I came home and I was so excited, and I was telling her about the exam that I'd passed. And I still remember her response to that, which was, oh, but you need to be careful, because once you finish uni and once you're qualified, you're actually going to be working with real people. So you need to be careful because people will sue you. And as a young person growing up, that was really, I didn't realize at the time, again, that it had an impact on me, but I find myself constantly doubting, what if I do this? What if someone does sue me? And it took a long time to reshape though and to rewire those thinking patterns, because it got to a point where it was almost automatic. You know, I was constantly doubting things, and it was really tough because I didn't understand at the time anxiety. I didn't understand that she had a mental illness. It was pretty much, she was the person who wanted the best for me, so she knew best. And that's where, you know, as adults, where if we recognize that we're struggling with a mental illness, it's really important to get treatment ASAP, because especially if there are children and young people around you, because they will feed onto that, or that will have an impact on them as well without you even realizing. Can also have a negative impact. So some of the effects of anxiety on our body, you know, it can impact on your liver. Again, your system pretty much get flooded with stress hormones, and again, the tense muscles. There's just so many ways that anxiety impacts on your body. It's not just the ones that are here. There are many other ways, and there are many other systems within our bodies that anxiety impacts on. But I won't go through all of them. In terms of long-term anxiety, so chronic stress, which, you know, long-term anxiety will also cause chronic stress, and likewise, chronic stress will also result in anxiety, weakens our immune system. So you might find, again, with that, you know, let's say, for example, you're eating all the right nutrition, which will help with anxiety. But if everything else is, like, say, for example, you're not getting enough proper rest, mental thought process is really negative, all those other systems, all those other things, if they aren't in place as well, and you find that you're constantly getting, for example, colds, you know, that could be an impact of having anxiety all the time, because it weakens your immune system. It causes heart disease as well, long-term, weight gain, and also weight loss as well, because someone who's really anxious might not want to eat much food. You know, they'll either overeat or they can't eat. You know, they're not hungry. The digestive system is kind of disconnected in terms of wanting food. Also, research has shown that there's a correlation as well between prolonged stress and anxiety and the structural degeneration of the hippocampus and impaired functioning of the prefrontal cortex, which is what I call the thinking brain, which is at the front of your brain. So it does impact as well in terms of impairing brain functioning as well. And again, those impairment can cause other issues and other problems. So when you talk about depression, you know, if certain part of your brain is affected because, let's say, because of another mental health illness, that in itself can cause depression. and it can maybe even cause other mental illness and also physical illness as well. The wear and tear also caused to the brain by chronic stress and anxiety could also be tied to an increased risk of depression and dementia. Okay. In terms of lasting damage, now we know that we can actually reshape our brains. The mind is so powerful. The way you think about things can actually impact on the shape of your brain. And that's where, I'll talk a bit more about this late in a bit, but CBT therapy is an evidence-based therapy that focuses on challenging irrational thought process. And over time, if you're constantly challenging those negative patterns, you're going to rewire the brain, and in turn, you're going to reshape your brain as well. So looking at treatments, going back to my example with anxiety. So again, growing up with my auntie, she was a person who, when as a child, when you're younger, I think it's the best time for you to learn certain values in life, because you pretty much believe anything and everything your parents say. And even though my auntie wasn't my parent, she was the closest thing to that for me. So growing up, when I came to live with her, that was my first experience of going to an SDA church. And she really, even though at the time she struggled with anxiety, I didn't realize it at that point when I started living with her. And but what I noticed was her faith and seeing that in her actually made me view things very positively. And this was like, primary age, secondary age level. What I was seeing, it was, she was constantly talking about, let's say, for example, if something went wrong, she would see it very negatively, but then she'll say, well, I'm just going to leave it to God. And over time, and at that point, her anxiety, I didn't see that much at that point. I started seeing it more in my late teenage years and early adulthood. When I was younger, her faith was so strong that literally any situation, the worst case situation scenarios, she would recognize, okay, this is really bad, but she would leave it to God. And for me, growing up, when she then became really, really anxious about things and she was really, really negative, it was confusing for me because this is someone who I've always been very faithful and trusting in God. But I'd learned those systems that I'd learned very early on became my coping strategies. They were what I turned to first when I was anxious. And I still remember now, growing up in like when it came to exams during my GCSEs and feeling really anxious. For me, it wasn't talking to friends and it wasn't talking to people. And I'm not saying I wouldn't have done that, but I didn't have that option at the time. I didn't feel at the time my friends was going through the same thing in terms of, feeling really anxious about the exams. It was our final exams that was going to pretty much determine whether we go to college or not. So I didn't want to talk to them because that for me felt like I was going to be adding extra burden onto them. And I didn't really have any other adults. I didn't know there were such things as therapy or, even people in the church. I didn't really feel close enough to anyone except for my auntie to talk about things. And at that point, when I was doing my GCSEs, she became extremely anxious, and it must have happened like gradually over the years, but I can't really remember seeing it. But everything was really, really negative, and again, like, it was really confusing. But I just remembered what worked when I was younger for her, which was scriptures. And I've actually got my favorite scriptures that really worked for me from my teenage years right up until now. Whenever I feel anxious, these are my 3 favorite scriptures for dealing with anxiety. So having faith in for me, it's having faith in God. That was my first, that has been and still is my first turn to or go to point. But yeah, so that's just my personal experience that I wanted to share, as well as having faith. And there are evidence as well, scientists have actually proven that people who do have faith in a religion, even if it's not Christianity, whatever religion they have faith into, they're actually, the percentage is a lot higher in terms of them overcoming mental health illnesses and physical illnesses, especially operations. They come through more. And was something we covered in my last neuroscience module. In terms of the percentage, I'm not sure what that is to share that today, but they have found that people who have faith, they seem to overcome illnesses a lot quicker than people who don't. Nutrition, again, is another, nutrition on its own, I don't think would be enough, but there's a food that helps fight depression as well as anxiety. And there is a website that talks about, which foods have these vitamins in, have these nutrition in that can also support you in terms of fighting anxiety and depression. I'm not sure, Jackie might have also mentioned some of these 3 weeks ago when she did her presentation. Cognitive behavioral therapy, in terms of talking therapies, cognitive behavioral therapy is the one that is the most popular by the NHS. Again, it's about challenging the cognition, it's challenging your thought process, trying to rule out the irrational thoughts. And with that, it will start off with, say, for example, the therapist will try to unpick, when did it start? When did the anxiety started? Was there a critical incident, a critical period when you started feeling anxious? And depending on what type of anxiety is, if it was a phobia, for example, again, CBT would be the best, because again, you're looking at retraining your cognition, and in doing that, you also retrain your behavior. So with my example of, my phobia is lizards, it's not something, we don't really have lizards in this country, so it's not something I feel like, okay, I need to go and work on this, because it's not affecting my day-to-day function. It's not something I'm bothered about. But if I was to go on holiday and I start thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to see some lizards, then it becomes an issue. But with my background, I'm also very good at trying to challenge the thoughts around it. but I have no interest in trying to work on that because it's not, like I say, it's not affecting my day-to-day functioning. But I'll give an example. So someone who's got phobia, you know, the therapist would want to look at, okay, when did you recognize you had this fear, and and most times, you know, there is a critical incident. If someone had a phobia of dogs, for example, it could be because they've been bitten by a dog in the past, or it could be an experience that they had with dogs that was negative. So CBT therapy will try to test out the thought process. So say, for example, if someone thought, okay, if I go near a dog, I'm going to get bitten, then the CBT therapist would then try and test that theory out with the person they're working with. We call it graded exposure. So with meat and lizards, just the thought of it is enough to bring me anxiety, to cause me anxiety. So the graded exposure would start with really small steps, and it would be something like, okay, maybe in a session we'll probably have a picture of the lizard and would look at what are the thoughts that comes to mind, what are the physical symptoms I'm feeling, and trying to challenge those experiences. And then it would gradually build up to maybe actually having a lizard in the room or something like that. But that's how CBT work in a nutshell. There are other therapies, you know, talking therapy, depending on the anxiety, because going back to my auntie, a lot of her anxiety stem from traumas, and so psychotherapy would be really good to help her unpick those traumas and to process them so that it's no longer impacting on her mental health. Self-help resources as well. So I get, oh gosh, sorry, don't know what I clicked. You know, there are a lot of different kind of resources out there. So it could be going back to God's plan, things like if you know you're an anxious person, or if, say, for example, you know that you'll get really anxious if you've got a deadline coming up, then put in practical strategies such as time management, managing your time better, maybe starting working on your project a week earlier than it needs to be in, or just little things like that. So having little systems in place that can help you manage those situations is actually really helpful as well to manage anxiety. Going out for a walk is really good. We're going to look at that on Thursday, when we'll look at ways to maintain a healthy mental health. But it's all going back to God's plan in terms of, you know, open air, making sure you're getting enough rest, diet and nutrition, drink enough water, just looking after your physical health, because all these things impact on your mental health. So whatever you can do to look after your health so that, you know, you're giving yourself the best opportunity to have a better mental health will also help with anxiety. If, say, for example, you're someone who, you know, you're probably listening and you're thinking, well, I do all that, I look after my body, I make sure I get enough rest, I put all the time in terms of planning and preparing for certain things, but I just can't seem to shake the anxiety, or I can't stop feeling anxious when I go to, let's say, social events. From a therapeutic perspective, a lot of people tend to avoid the situations that makes them anxious. and avoidance actually maintain the problem, because you're not allowing yourself the opportunity to prove those negative thoughts wrong. So then, if, say, for example, you had a really negative experience in a social situation, for example, a really negative experience, and you completely avoid all social events since, your brain will hold on to that one experience that it has, and it will tell you that, okay, this is what happened, so this is what's going to keep happening. So you almost have to kind of put yourself in that position where you're not avoiding, because avoidance does maintain. And you could try small things like trying a smaller social situation, for example. For me, that I mentioned about things going back to church, I felt really anxious. It would be so easy for me to just stop going and to stick to Zoom, because I can still watch the sermon on Zoom. But I guess with my experience and coming from my professional background as well, I know in the long run that's not going to help me or my mental health. So I still keep going. But what I find is I'm still leaving early. I'll either leave straight after Sabbath school, or I'm finding myself leaving halfway through the service, or as soon as the service is finished, I'm out. I'm out of church. But each time I'm either staying a bit longer, or I'm feeling a little bit less anxious being back in that setting. So that's just an example of why it's best not to avoid these situations when you're feeling anxious. And I think that's pretty much it. I kind of sailed through, because last time I went over, so people didn't have the opportunity to ask questions. So I'm going to stop sharing, and if anyone's got any questions, just let me know.
You can ask the question at this moment if you have any.
Could I just ask, OCD, that's a form of anxiety, and what would be the best method in kind of unlearning the behaviors and the thought patterns?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't actually cover OCD. The types of anxiety that I mentioned as well, by the way, that's just some, so I'll just get that out of the way. So there are other types. In terms of OCD, again, just going back on in terms of my professional background, it's CBT, because CBT therapy, again, it looks at the cognitions, it digs into, and it doesn't just look at, okay, in, let's say, the here and now. Sometimes it goes all the way back to childhood in terms of trying to understand when did it start, because for some people it's something that they don't actually consciously think about. But when you're actually sitting with someone who's trained to dig a bit deeper, it's surprising that it can actually come back, and then you can be like, it's almost like a light bulb moment where you think, that was when it started. And sometimes understanding when it started will help you to kind of rewire the thought processes around that, because you can re-evaluate that incident that may have brought it on. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Andrea, is anxiety hereditary, or is it something being learned?
I would say it's learned. Well, you're more likely to develop anxiety if your parents had anxiety. because the way they respond to daily stresses, you're going to learn that from them. Or even, and it doesn't have to be parents, it could just be your social network. If everyone in your social network or the people you're closest to are very anxious people, you really have to be strong enough to, otherwise it's going to rub off on you as well in terms of the way they see things. So I would say I don't want to say it's not, there's no genetic links. I think there's definitely biological interactions, but also, again, like depression, it's interlinked with the environment and the social aspects.
Right. In terms of which one comes first? Is it depression or anxiety? In that order, is it anxiety, depression, or depression, anxiety?
So it depends really. It could be either or. Someone who struggles with depression, they could develop anxiety as well if they weren't an anxious person. So like example, if someone was really struggling, but they are so afraid of the stigma, or if they're seen as the person who's really strong, or if they're a person who had to always be strong, they might not necessarily want people to see them vulnerable, and that in itself can put a lot of pressure and a lot of stress onto that person, and that level of chronic stress can result in anxiety as well. But likewise, someone who's really anxious could eventually get really depressed as well, because let's say, for example, with generalized anxiety or social anxiety, if it's affecting my social life, I'm going to become more and more isolated. Some of the young people I've worked with anxiety, they started out with having supportive friends, but then it got to a point where they were completely isolated because people stopped inviting them to certain places, which in turn ended up resulting into feeling really low and isolated.
Right. When it comes to depression, hearing the word depression, anxiety, we always think the negative. We always put a negative spin towards it. Is there any positive towards when it comes to anxiety? Is there any positives? Yeah,
definitely. Like at the start of the presentation, I spoke about at some point in life we'll all experience anxiety. During this presentation, when I was asked to do this, I was just like, I was like, I will, because I want to do more of this. But when it came down to it, I was like, oh gosh, what have I agreed to? But that is the positive aspect of anxiety, because it can push you out of your comfort zone, and if you stay in your comfort zone, you're not really reaching your full potential, because you're not taking that step. You're just playing safe all the time, and sometimes you just need that extra push, which you might feel anxious, but the anxiety will help you to do better. Again, with exams, if I didn't experience any kind of anxiety when I was doing exams, I probably wouldn't have studied as much. So I think definitely there is positive to it as well.
Right, and in terms of anxiety again, how far is too far in terms of when we are suffering or going through that period of anxiety? How far is too far?
Sorry, could you ask that again? It kind of broke up.
Okay. In relation to anxiety, in terms of the severeness of that illness,
Mhm.
or what we'll categorize it as an illness or whatever, mental issue, a mental health issue.
Yeah.
Normally with depression, this week you talk about being open, transparent, talk to someone. When it comes to anxiety, how far is it the same? Would you recommend the same thing for anybody who's suffering from it? To be transparent, talk to somebody in that sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of how far is too far is when you recognize it's actually impacting on your day-to-day functioning, your day-to-day, whatever you do in your day, you can't do them anymore because of how anxious you're feeling, then then it's at the point where you need to take it seriously. Or even if, say, for example, you're feeling anxious and you're doing all the things that you think you should be doing, but then it's not making a difference or it's getting worse, then at that point I'd seek professional support. And again, like yesterday I mentioned about talking therapies. Today I didn't go into much detail in terms of where you can get those support, but it's the same as with depression. And first protocol could be your GP.
Right. So basically, we can see a strong link between depression and anxiety in that sense. They both goes together in that sense, because getting from you when you're depressed, anxiety, there's some form of trace of anxiety within depression in that sense. That's what am I correct? Yeah.
And it's not to say that everyone who is depressed will experience anxiety, nor is it that everyone who's experiencing anxiety will get depressed. It's not to say that that will happen to everyone. Everyone's different. Some people will experience anxiety, but not necessarily depression. And, again, going back to clinical depression is different to feeling low. So clinical depression, if you're feeling at least 5 of the symptoms over a 2-week period. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. Is there any other questions we have tonight?
Yeah, I've got one. It's I wanted to know. Hi, good evening, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I just wanted to check in regards to children. If children have, say, for instance, been bullied, what's the best way of approaching a child who's been bullied? Because a lot of times children do not explain, what's happened until long afterwards. They'll bottle everything up as if they can cope for themselves. What's the best way, once you've found out, say, a child's been bullied, to actually deal with that in terms of building up their self-confidence and things like that?
Okay, so once you find out that young person's being bullied, it would depend on 2 things. So one, if you find out from the young person directly, or 2, if you find out from someone else. I think if you find out from the young person directly, then that's your opening that's almost them opening the door then for you to come in and try and support. The best way to support someone who's being bullied is first to start by really listening, listening to what they are and I'll cover a lot of this tomorrow when we're looking at children and young people, but really listening to what they're saying, because I guess the reason I'm in, therapists have a role is because a lot of people don't feel understood or they don't feel heard. And I think once you listen to the young person, you can really find out how they're feeling about the situation, and also maybe what they want you to do about it, if there is anything they want you to do about it. and it also depends on what role you're in. So if it's a question in terms of what do I do if it's my child, naturally, if that was my child, for example, and it's someone who's, you know, bullying them from school, I would want to go down to that school and talk to the head teacher or the teacher, because they'll need to do something about it as well. But I would always make sure we have to be mindful not to go in from our survival brain, which is the back of our brain, and that is the rage part of our brain. So we don't want to go in from our emotional brain too much, because that in itself could maybe shut things down for the young person. So if the young person's not sharing that with a parent, it might be because they're worried that, or if I tell my mom, she's going to go to school and she's going to make the situation worse for me. Whereas if you were to listen to the young person in terms of, okay, what's happened, show that you really care and explain that you want to do what's best for them. And also hear their concerns. You know, if they're worried about, the situation's going to be worse, include them in what you're going to do. So if, say, for example, you're going to speak to the teacher, maybe have the young person there with you so that they're not anxious about what's been said and they know what the plan is going to be going forward. And you can work with the systems as well. You know, you can work with the teacher or the school in terms of how to manage that best so that it doesn't create more problems for the young person. If it's, say, for example, cyberbullying, you know, which is online bullying, for me, that's a really simple one. I'd block, if it's, say, for example, someone getting bullied via these online games or Snapchat, I'd get rid of it. Or you'd speak to the young person about why it's best to come off it, because it's not good for their mental health and it's not good for them. And try and explore it with them, rather than say, right, that's it, you're not going on it anymore, because to them you're just being reactive, you're not actually helping the situation. But if you explain to them why it's not best for them to be on, and by explaining, you know, feedback what you're seeing in terms of how they're presenting, asking them how they feel when someone bullies them, and use their own words to explain to them why it's best not to be on, so that they're also part of that.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's just because I know, just in conversations with lots of people, a lot of people, young children, especially in church, are really having a bad time now, especially with the images as well, too, the whole kind of body and everything else, and they're comparing themselves to images which are just completely, but they obviously don't realize, you know, Photoshops and things and all these things are there for, you know, making the person look fantastic, and then they're comparing themselves to basically robots. Yeah,
which is true. And another, you know, at the moment I'm actually working with a young person who, she developed an eating disorder over lockdown. Before that, she was really active, she was really confident, very outgoing, and, you know, high self-esteem. And during lockdown, because all her activities that she was doing was taken away from her, a normal day-to-day routine was taken away. She wasn't going to school anymore. So she spent ages on social media, and social media is just full of full of everyone's best face or fake face. You know, it's not reality. And it's also trying to educate our young people that what they see on social media is not necessarily reality, and you can even get visual with it. So I've done that in sessions where I get visual. I will actually show, and sometimes using, like, for example, celebrities who they it's a big thing for some young people. Show them when they're best dressed compared to when they're not so best dressed, but it's the same person, and it's reality. When I get up and get ready for work, I look better than when I'm at home on the weekend because I'm just home. And it's trying to get them to understand that. And it still doesn't take away the pressure to look perfect. And it's this perfection that they have in mind, which is not reality. There's a lot of filters nowadays, and pictures are filtered. So a lot of what they're seeing on social media is not real anyway. It's having those conversations with them and visually showing them as well, because sometimes talking about it isn't enough. They have to visually see. So showing there's someone on Instagram who, she's a fitness trainer, and she would actually post pictures of herself when she's feeling bloated and when she's not feeling bloated, but that picture could be taken in the same day, and it doesn't look the same, but she's just showing this is reality, even for someone who's a fitness trainer.
I just wish that, I know you're doing the presentations tomorrow, that more children, young children, would be able to tune in. And I just wish that the parents who are on this evening, or aunties or relatives or whatever, could try to get some more young people on the platform, just so they can listen in to what you've got to say, because I think it's really beneficial and very informative what you've got to say as well too. And I think it would help a lot of children out there who are really stuck at the moment. But a lot of times with meetings, for instance, like this, the parents will come on, or other people, and the young children will be in the background, not particularly paying attention. My daughter's here with me now because I just wanted to hear the general overall discussion as well too. Thank you.
Yeah. It is a good point, because a lot of time, and I think in terms of, like, say for example, hopefully there won't be another lockdown, but I think the more time parents also spend with their children and away from screens, because even when you go into schools now, it's screens. The schools that I'm working in, they use TV as the board. There's iPads, and I understand we have to move with technology, but there's certain things that I think you just can't replace. And the more you connect with the young people, the more they'll feel safer. You'll find out more about what's going on in their lives as well. They'll be able to communicate more with you as well. So I think, and then that's less time on social media. Nowadays there's a lot of people, like, I could be in the kitchen, one person's in the front room, one person's in their bedroom, and everyone's communicating about something when they're all in the same house. People aren't communicating face to face anymore so much, and that in itself can be an issue, contributing factor, should I say.
Andrew, we have an interesting question here. Can we have a low on vegan diet without a supplement balance for missing levels?
Can we say that again? Sorry. Can we have
lows on a vegan diet without supplement balance for missing levels?
Okay. I'm going to be honest here. This is an area that is still quite new to me. I've learned quite a lot from Jackie. I don't know if the person who's asking the question saw Jackie's presentation, but I've learned a lot from her prior to this. And at the moment, I'm trying out a vegan diet, and I'm using supplements as well, because I'm still it's still very new to me. So I'm not too sure how to answer that one, honestly. But I'm happy to try and find out for the person who have asked. and I could maybe speak with Jackie. I think she would have a better answer than I do on that one.
And also, just well, this is not really a question; it's just a request. I think someone is requesting for the nutrients list.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if they put their email,
Yes. If
then
they
I
send
could
the
send.
email to Andre,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I'll send it to them. I also have, and I can send it, I do have some mini booklets that we created at Preston Church, and it's around managing stress and anxiety. So there's information on that, but there's also, it's almost like a work booklet that you can do yourself for yourself. Some people, I find those really useful, so I'm happy to share those to Andre, and then share that to anyone.
Right. I have an not interesting question. You would have talked about reversing reversing like this whole concept of social media when it comes to bullying. You was referring to one. Is that just a rigorous process where you can just look at your child who's being bullied? You need to stop social media, stop TikTok, stop Instagram. What's the process?
It's so difficult because there's more than one factor to take into consideration. So firstly, the relationship with the child is always crucial. I'll always go back to the relationship, because what I find in all my years of experience working with children and young people, everything comes down to the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I'm working with the families, it's interesting to see the dynamics between the parents and the young person. So the relationship is crucial, and the first, I guess I would say, is the first thing to think about. Connect with the young person, get on their level, try and help them to understand that you do want the best for them. And most times children do know that, but they want to keep up with the trends. They want to keep up with what their peers are doing, and peers are massively influencing people. And that's where they really have to have, the foundation needs to be so strong from when they were born. You got to have those strong foundation to build on, because the stronger the home foundations, the harder it will be for them to be led away by peers. But in terms of social media, I'm not saying there are good qualities. There's good things about social media, and to try and stop a young person from engaging in any social activity on social media would probably cause the opposite in terms of what you're intending. So I wouldn't necessarily say ban them off social media forever or completely, but maybe have an agreement with the young person where it's, for example, okay, you can be on Facebook, but maybe for an hour a day, or X, Y, and Z, or if anything happens, you have to share that with me. So having an agreement with the young person, or you might be able to have access to their account as well. So you can, not to check up on them, but to keep them safe. And if you explain that as well, you're not trying to check up on them. It's not that you don't trust them. You are just wanting to keep them safe. So it's just about, depending on the relationship, depending on the young person and other factors, there's just a lot of little things to think about in terms of how to go about managing that.
All right, thank you very much. So it's very much important for us to lay that foundation at home. Yeah. Is there any other question before we close this session for tonight?
For the person who wants the nutrition screenshot, I can definitely
Yes,
send that
yes.
now.
If you can, yes, if you can just,
Yeah. I'll see if I can do it via Zoom. If not, I will send it straight away to the email address.
Yes. Thanks,
Okay, no,
Pastor.
it's not letting me paste, so I will send it straight away to the email address.
Right.
Someone's just asked about the booklet. Yes, please. And I can send those. Or if you don't mind sharing your email address here, then I can send it directly to you. If you don't want to share your email address on here, then I can definitely send that to him, and he can send them to you. So I will send the is it Claudie? I don't want to pronounce the name wrong. I'm terrible at I will send that screenshot to you now as well. And that should come through now. Copy. And send, yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions?
I don't think so.
One quick one. What's the best way to navigate your child's friendships as well too? Like, for instance, at school and just social, because I don't know if anybody else out there has seen the same thing. When they're talking to their friends, there's a whole different code. It's like they talk in code, complete code.
Yes, definitely, it's true.
It's not the alphabet in sections, which unless you know what they're talking about, you are just whoa.
I would say take as much interest as possible. You know, from what I've seen, let's say in schools and working with families, and also my own experience with my little girl, I like to, sometimes I would actually take her and her friends out together, and it's not necessarily to places that cost a lot. It could be somewhere free. I sometimes let them play here, and as much as it's, you know, I'm trying to also encourage her social skills, it's more also me wanting to try and see who her friends are, and taking an interest in that. And when she, for example, you know, the more interest I take, I notice she talks more about her day and also her friends and how they're, you know, her friends. For example, I'll give an example. The other day she came home and said, oh, you know, my friend was being really naughty in school today. And that's not something she used to say to me, let's say maybe 2 years ago. But it's because I've been taking a lot more interest in what goes on in school, you know, what her friends are into, what she's into, and then I try to advise her as best as I can from this point. There are things as well, depending on the age of the young person, there are things that we use in school called social stories, and they're also a good way to kind of get points across in a indirective way to children. And that's been, I find that quite useful, but that's more with younger children. That's been helpful.
It's because a lot of children now, a lot of girls, for instance, they will have a lot of boys as friends as well as girls when they sort of hit, you know, they're sort of pre-teens, teens. So it's a case of, you know, how would you navigate those situations where, as far as I'm
Okay.
concerned, they're like, well, you know, my friend is actually a boy, not a
Yeah.
not a girl.
Mhm. So, I'm glad you've asked that question. Actually, I'm glad you clarified that because, from when I know things have changed much now compared to when I was a teenager. But when I was a teenager, I had 4 really close friends. 2 were girls and 2 were boys. But I didn't dare come home and say I have 2 close friends that were boys. It was just like, no.
So you
And
didn't
for
tell your
me,
parents, so your parents didn't actually know that you had friends. Oh, I see.
No.
That's interesting. Yeah.
my auntie, at the time it was my auntie, and I guess because I knew her really well, and I knew straight away she was gonna go gun blazing, and I was gonna get a full on lecture, and for me it was just like, why would I want to do that to myself? um, so I think me now as a mum, my little girl, she's only in primary school, and she plays with both girls and boys. And the last time she came here to play, and we've got like a mini play area downstairs. She came with 2 girls and a boy, and the boy is only 6 years old. But I was like, but then I thought,
What's he
okay,
doing here?
yes. I was thinking, why is there a boy as well? But I didn't share that with her, and I didn't turn him away. And they play so innocently, they play so innocently. As teenagers, I think one of the things to be really mindful of is you don't want your child to be afraid to talk to you. There's things that I wish I could have spoken to my auntie about when I was not even a teenager, probably about 19 at the time, but I just dared not. For me, it was a no-go area. And I think if I'd had that relationship with her where she wasn't going to go gun blazing, then I would feel more comfortable to speak to her openly about things that I was anxious about, or things that I was concerned about, or friendships that I was concerned about. And she would have been able to advise me more as someone who was older with more experience. But I didn't have that. I didn't feel I had that, and I couldn't go to her. So I tend to go to peers instead for advice. So I think it's really important to, I'm not saying to accept, you don't have to accept anything you don't feel comfortable with, but I think it's definitely important to have that open conversation with your teenagers so that they understand where you're coming from. And they would really appreciate that, even if in the moment their behavior says something differently, they'll go away. The number of teenagers that I've worked with, and the things that comes up in sessions that I'm like, oh, I wish the parents could hear this, because it would really reassure the parent. But the sessions is confidential unless there's safeguarding elements to it, or unless they ask me to share certain information with their parents, or unless they themselves go and share things with their parents. So I just think it's really important to have a really open and honest relationship with your young person, and not shying away from difficult topics as well, because you can definitely guarantee whatever you shy away from, they will go to somewhere else to get information, and you want to make sure they're getting the best information, not misguided, construed information on things.
Yes, because some of the girls are saying, for instance, they prefer to have boys as friends, because some of the girls are very, toxic and turn on them. So they actually feel more safer actually explaining and having boys as friends because they're more supportive, which is an interesting concept, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I've experienced that. Like me personally, growing up as when I was a teenager, I had two best friends who were girls and two best friends who were boys. And at that time, there was literally no interest. I'm in terms of for me it was purely friendship. I got on really well with them, and I was able to study well with them, and they were fun to be around as well. They were really positive, and they were more my kind of people. Whereas there were girls who, for me, were toxic. In terms of behavior, in terms of conversations, what they were doing, the things they would do behind their parents' back, and for me, the way I was brought up stayed with me in terms of how to just being respectful and not committing crime, not doing any kind of crimes or that kind of stuff. It was just the way I was brought up stayed with me, but I had male and female best friends, but I just wouldn't dare mention I had male friends. Yeah, so
Thank you.
and I think sometimes it's not, it's not, I think it just comes down again to just being really honest, because the more honest you are with with your children, your young people, they are going to be honest with you as well. And you can have conversations with them about boundaries and anything that they that you feel that you should be having conversations about.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I just want to thank everyone. Thank everyone for coming out tonight and for such another wonderful, informative presentation being delivered by you, Andrea. And thank you again for even helping myself and others who are listening, whether near and far. Just want to thank you, and for everyone. Just thank you for coming out. Just before we close, let's just have a word of prayer and thank God for all what He's done for us tonight. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we just want to thank you for another wonderful, informative presentation being delivered to us tonight. Lord, we just want to ask that you may just continue to be with Andrea, Lord, as she go out there, Lord, trying to help not just people around her within her circle, but Lord, others who she don't even know. So Lord, we just want to praise you and thank you, Lord. We want to pray that this information will touch every corner, where even every corner of this world, Lord. We just want to praise you and thank you for all that you have done. In the most we may pray.